One soldier. One grenade. 5 death machines. When impossible odds met unbreakable will, history changed. Winter sun barely broke through the thick smoke that choked the French countryside on December 16, 1944. Temperature had dropped to -12 degrees Celsius, and Corporal James "Jimmy" Hartwell could see his breath forming clouds of ice crystals in the frozen air. His fingers, wrapped in tattered gloves with holes at the tips, trembled not from cold but from something deeper, the kind of fear that gnaws at a soldier's soul when he knows death is stalking him. Jimmy was 23 years old, but his eyes looked 40. 3 years of war had carved deep lines into his face, turning a farm boy from Nebraska into something harder, something forged in the hellfire of 1,000 battles. He'd survived North Africa, Sicily, and the beaches of Normandy. He'd seen friends blown apart, watched brothers in arms die screaming for their mothers. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for what was coming. The 101st Airborne had been rushed to defend the Belgian town of Bastogne. The Germans had launched a massive counteroffensive through the Ardennes forest, catching the Allies completely off guard. Panzer divisions were tearing through American lines like wolves through sheep. Intelligence reports spoke of entire battalions being wiped out in hours. The radio chatter was chaos incarnate, desperate calls for help, screams cut short, static where living voices had been moments before. Jimmy's squad was positioned along a narrow road that wound through dense forest. It was a strategic choke point, one of the few routes German armor could use to reach Bastogne. Command had been clear: hold that road at all costs. If those tanks get through, Bastogne falls. If Bastogne falls, we lose the war. No pressure. His squad consisted of 12 men when they dug in 2 days ago. Now there were 7. Sergeant Morrison had taken shrapnel to the chest during an artillery barrage. Private Kowalski had frozen to death in his foxhole. 3 others had simply vanished during a German patrol probe the previous night. Now it was just Jimmy, Corporal Davies, and 5 other terrified kids playing soldier. They had 1 bazooka with 3 rockets, a handful of grenades, rifles that jammed in the cold, and orders to stop an entire armored column. The forest was eerily silent. Even the birds had fled. That's when Jimmy heard it, a sound that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The deep, guttural rumble of diesel engines. The metallic clanking of tank treads grinding through frozen earth. And above it all, the high-pitched squeal of steel on steel that made your teeth hurt. "They're coming," Davies whispered, his voice barely audible over the growing thunder. Jimmy crawled to the edge of their position and peered through the morning mist. What he saw made his blood turn to ice water. Not 1 tank. Not 2. 5 massive German Panthers were rolling down the road in a staggered formation, their 75mm cannons sweeping back and forth like the heads of hunting predators. Behind them, he could make out at least 2 platoons of infantry, maybe 40 soldiers, maybe more. "Jesus Christ," someone muttered behind him. "We're dead. We're all dead." Davies grabbed the bazooka, his hands shaking so badly the weapon rattled. "I'll take the lead tank. Jimmy, you get ready with the grenades for what?" interrupted Private Chun, a kid from San Francisco who looked about 17. "We've got maybe 6 grenades total." "What are we supposed to do? Ask them to line up nicely?" Jimmy's mind was racing. Standard tactics said engage armor at distance, use anti-tank weapons, fall back if overwhelmed. But there was nowhere to fall back to. The forest behind them was too dense for rapid retreat. And between them and Bastogne lay 15 miles of open ground where panzer commanders would hunt them like rabbits. They had to hold. Somehow. "Everyone spread out," Jimmy ordered, surprised by how steady his voice sounded. "Davies, you take that lead tank like you said. Chun, Rodriguez, you're on the infantry. Don't fire until I give the signal. Let them get close. How close? Rodriguez asked, his Puerto Rican accent thick with fear. Close enough to see their faces. The Panthers continued their advance. 70 meters, 60, 50. Jimmy could see the black crosses painted on their turrets now, could see the commanders standing in their hatches, confident and contemptuous. They thought this would be easy. They thought they were facing a broken, demoralized American unit that would scatter at the first shot. They thought wrong. Now. Jimmy screamed. Davies squeezed the trigger. The bazooka roared, spitting flame and smoke. The rocket streaked toward the lead Panther in a contrail of fire. For one perfect moment, Jimmy thought they had it, thought Davies had made the shot of his life. Then the rocket hit the tank's sloped armor at a bad angle and deflected harmlessly into the trees, exploding with a flash that did nothing but announce their position. Shit. Davies scrambled to reload. The Panther's turret swiveled with mechanical precision, its gun barrel locking onto Davies' position. Jimmy saw what was about to happen a split second before it did. Davies. Move! The tank fired. The explosion was apocalyptic, a thunderclap of such violence that it lifted Davies off his feet and threw him backward like a ragdoll. Where he'd been standing, there was now a smoking crater. Trees 20 feet away had been shredded to splinters. And Davies was on the ground, his body twisted at impossible angles, blood pooling beneath him. Man down! Man down! Chun was screaming into the radio, but Jimmy could hear the static. No response. They were alone. The other 4 Panthers had spread out now, forming a killing formation. Their machine guns opened up, raking the American position with devastating fire. Rodriguez went down with bullets stitching across his chest. Private Thompson took a round through the throat and died choking on his own blood. 4 left. 4 men against 5 tanks and 40 infantry. Jimmy grabbed a grenade, pulled the pin, and hurled it at the advancing infantry. It exploded among them, and he heard screams. But there were too many. They kept coming, using the tanks as mobile cover. The second Panther lurched forward, trying to flank their position. Its treads crushed trees like twigs. Jimmy could smell the exhaust now, could feel the ground shaking beneath him. Chun fired his rifle uselessly against the armored beast. The bullets sparked off the hull like fireflies. We're out of anti-tank. Someone yelled. We've got nothing that can stop them. Jimmy looked at the remaining grenades. Regular fragmentations, anti-personnel, about as useful against a tank as throwing rocks. His mind went to his training, searching desperately for anything they'd taught him about fighting armor without proper weapons. Then he remembered. A lecture, months ago, from a grizzled instructor with burn scars covering half his face. The old soldier had been a tanker himself before his own vehicle had been hit. He'd told them about weak points, about how even the mightiest tank had vulnerabilities. The engine deck, Jimmy muttered. The vents. If you can get something inside, an idea began to form. It was insane. It was suicidal. But it was the only chance they had. The third Panther was moving into position now, trying to get a clear shot at their foxholes. It was closer than the others, maybe 20 meters away. Its commander was focused on the forest ahead, not expecting anyone to be crazy enough to attack. Jimmy grabbed all the remaining grenades, 5 in total. He pulled Chun close. Listen to me. When I go, you light them up. All of them. Every gun you've got. Make them think we're still fighting from here. Go? Go where? Chun's eyes were wild with terror and confusion. I'm going to stop those tanks. With what? You've got grenades that can't even scratch paint. I've got something better. I've got surprise. Before Chun could argue, before he could even think about what he was doing, Jimmy Hartwell climbed out of the foxhole. The German infantry saw him immediately. Bullets whipped past his head, so close he felt the displacement of air. He ran not away from the tanks, toward them, his legs pumped, his lungs burned, and some detached part of his brain noted that he'd never run this fast in his life. The 3rd Panther's machine gun swiveled toward him. He dove behind a fallen log as tracers chewed up the ground where he'd been. The tank was 10 meters away now. He could see the engine deck, see the ventilation grills that fed air to the massive diesel engine. If he could get a grenade in there, if he could damage the fuel system or ignite ammunition stored in the rear compartment, it was a long shot. Hell, it was a miracle shot. The Panther rolled forward, its treads grinding. Jimmy timed it perfectly. As the tank passed his position, he sprinted from cover, running alongside the moving behemoth. German infantry spotted him and opened fire, but he was so close to the tank now that they risked hitting their own vehicle. He leaped. His hands found purchase on the hot metal of the engine deck. He pulled himself up, his boots slipping on the angled armor. The tank commander finally saw him, a shocked German face, young, barely older than Jimmy himself. The officer reached for his sidearm. Jimmy was faster. He grabbed the first grenade, pulled the pin, and jammed it into the engine vent. Then the second. Then the third. He could see the German commander's eyes widen in horror as he realized what was happening. The 4th grenade. The 5th. Get off! Get off! The German was screaming in accented English, his pistol coming up. Jimmy jumped, hitting the ground hard enough to knock the wind from his lungs. He rolled, came up running, bullets kicking up dirt all around him. Behind him, the Panther's engine coughed once, twice, then it exploded. The sound was like the end of the world. The tank's engine deck blew outward in a geyser of flame and shrapnel. Fire erupted from the ventilation system, drawn inward by the engine's air intake, spreading through the vehicle's internal compartments. Jimmy heard screaming from inside, brief, terrible, then silent. But the explosion did something more. The Panther had been carrying extra fuel drums on its rear deck, a common practice but a dangerous one. When the grenades detonated, they ruptured those drums. Burning diesel sprayed across the road in a wave of liquid fire. The 4th Panther was right behind the 3rd. The burning fuel splashed across its front glacis, found its way into the driver's vision port. Jimmy watched in disbelief as the tank swerved wildly, the driver blinded by flames and smoke. It slammed into the 5th Panther with a grinding screech of metal. Both tanks locked together, treads tangled, trying to separate. The crews were shouting at each other in German, panicking. And they'd stopped right on top of the burning fuel. Jimmy didn't know what happened next, whether ammunition cooked off in the destroyed 3rd tank, or whether the fire finally reached the fuel tanks of the tangled 4th and 5th Panthers. All he knew was that the world became fire. The explosion lifted all 3 tanks into the air. For one impossible moment, dozens of tons of steel seemed to float, suspended in a ball of orange and red flame. Then gravity reasserted itself, and the burning hulks crashed back to Earth. The lead Panther, seeing its support vehicles destroyed, began to reverse. But the 2nd Panther, caught between advance and retreat, turned its turret, trying to target Jimmy's position. Its commander emerged from the hatch, gesturing frantically, trying to understand what had just happened. That's when Chun and the surviving Americans opened fire with everything they had. Rifles cracked. A machine gun they'd salvaged from a destroyed Jeep hammered out rounds. The German infantry, shocked by the destruction of 3 tanks, broke and ran. The lead Panther's commander made a decision. Faced with an enemy that could somehow destroy 3 heavy tanks in seconds, he chose survival over glory. The tank retreated, its partner following, both vehicles backing rapidly down the road. Their guns still trained on the American position but not firing. They fled. Jimmy collapsed to his knees, gasping for air, his ears ringing so badly he couldn't hear his own heartbeat. Smoke filled his lungs. His hands were burned from touching the hot tank metal. His uniform was scorched and torn, but he was alive. Chun appeared beside him, dragging him back toward their position. "You crazy son of a bitch. You beautiful, crazy son of a bitch. You did it. You actually did it." Jimmy looked back at the road. 3 Panthers lay in burning ruins. The smoke rose 1,000 feet into the winter sky, a black column visible for miles. German infantry bodies littered the ground. The 2 surviving tanks were still retreating, getting smaller in the distance. 1 man. 5 grenades. 3 tanks destroyed. 2 more driven off. It should have been impossible. They found Jimmy 2 hours later, still sitting in his foxhole, staring at nothing. A medic checked him for injuries but found only superficial burns and cuts. The damage, the real damage, was somewhere deeper. How many? A major asked, surveying the scene. 7 of us held this position, Chun reported, his voice hollow. 4 survived. Against 5 Panthers and 2 infantry platoons. The major looked at the burning wrecks, then at Jimmy. "Who destroyed the tanks?" Chun pointed. "He did. Corporal Hartwell. All of them. With hand grenades. That's not possible. I watched him do it." Word spread fast. By that evening, every soldier in Bastogne knew the story. By the next day, Division Command knew. By the week's end, it had reached Supreme Headquarters. They pinned the Distinguished Service Cross on Jimmy's chest in a hasty ceremony. A photographer captured the moment, a hollow-eyed soldier standing at attention, his uniform still stained with blood and smoke. While a general spoke words that Jimmy didn't hear, all he could think about was Davies, and Rodriguez, and Thompson, and the young German tank commander's face in that split second before the grenades exploded. The war continued. Jimmy fought through the rest of the Battle of the Bulge, through the Rhine crossing, all the way to Germany's heartland. He killed more men, watched more friends die. The Distinguished Service Cross was upgraded to the Medal of Honor. His face appeared in newspapers. Back home, the tank killer, the headline screamed. 1 man destroys entire panzer platoon. They made him into a hero. A legend. A symbol. But Jimmy Hartwell never felt like a hero. Heroes, he thought, were the ones who didn't make it home. The ones whose names were carved into white crosses in foreign soil. He was just a survivor, a man who'd been too stubborn or too scared to die when he should have. When the war finally ended, they sent him home to Nebraska. A parade waited. Reporters. Pretty girls who wanted to kiss a war hero. But Jimmy couldn't shake the smell of burning diesel and burning flesh. Couldn't stop hearing the screams from inside that tank. Years later, an interviewer asked him, "What was going through your mind when you ran toward those tanks? How did you find the courage?" Jimmy stared at the man for a long time before answering. "It wasn't courage," he finally said. "Courage is a choice. I didn't have a choice. Those tanks were going to kill my friends, kill everyone in Bastogne, maybe change the whole war. Someone had to stop them. I just happened to be the one close enough to try. But you must have known it was suicide. 5 grenades against 5 tanks? I wasn't trying to destroy 5 tanks, Jimmy said quietly. I was trying to destroy one. Just one. If I could stop one, maybe buy us a few more minutes, maybe give my squad a chance to fall back. I never thought about the others. I didn't plan what happened. The fire, the fuel, the way they were positioned, that was luck. Dumb, blind luck? Luck? The interviewer sounded incredulous. The official report says you single-handedly destroyed 3 enemy tanks and forced 2 more to retreat. The German after-action report confirms that their panzer company abandoned the attack because they believed they were facing a new type of American anti-tank weapon. You held that road. You saved Bastogne. You call that luck? Jimmy shrugged. I call it Tuesday. That's what it felt like. Just another Tuesday where everything went to hell and we had to figure out how to live until Wednesday. But the world didn't see it that way. The world saw a hero, a soldier who'd done the impossible, who'd faced down overwhelming odds and won. The truth, as Jimmy knew, was more complicated. Yes, he'd destroyed those tanks. Yes, he'd held the line. But he'd also gotten Davies killed by being too slow to react. He'd failed to save Rodriguez and Thompson. And that German tank commander, the kid who'd been about Jimmy's age, who probably had a girl back home waiting for him, Jimmy had killed him too. War wasn't simple. Heroism wasn't clean. And victory always came at a cost. 70 years later, Jimmy Hartwell's granddaughter asked him about the war. She was working on a school project about World War II heroes, and naturally, she wanted to interview her grandfather. Jimmy, now 93, his hands gnarled with arthritis, his eyes clouded with cataracts, sat in his rocking chair and thought about what to tell her. Grandpa? She prompted. The teacher said you won the Medal of Honor. Is that true? He nodded slowly. It's in a box somewhere. Your grandmother knows where. Why don't you display it? How could he explain? How could he tell this bright-eyed teenager about the weight of that medal, heavier than any physical object? How it reminded him of every man he'd failed to save, every decision that had led to someone else's death. Because, he finally said, that medal isn't just mine. It belongs to Davies and Rodriguez and Thompson, to Chun and all the others who stood on that road. The ones who lived and the ones who didn't. I'm just the one who survived to wear it. But you're a hero, Grandpa. Everyone says so. Jimmy looked at his granddaughter, at her innocent faith in the simple narratives of good and evil, of heroes and villains. He didn't have the heart to destroy that. Not yet. The world would teach her soon enough that reality was messier, more painful, more ambiguous than any story. Maybe I was, he said softly, for about 5 minutes on one morning in December 1944. The rest of the time, I was just a scared kid trying to stay alive and keep my friends alive. Sometimes I succeeded. Usually, I didn't. What do you want me to tell my class? Jimmy thought about it. Tell them that war is hell. Tell them that sometimes ordinary people do extraordinary things because they have no other choice. Tell them that the real heroes are the ones who don't come home. And tell them, he paused, his voice breaking, tell them to never, ever let it happen again. Whatever it takes, don't let there be another war where kids have to learn how to kill each other. His granddaughter wrote it all down, her pencil scratching across notebook paper. She didn't understand yet, but maybe someday she would. That night, alone in his room, Jimmy pulled out an old box from the back of his closet. Inside was his Medal of Honor. Beside it were other things. A photograph of Davies grinning at the camera the day before he died. Rodriguez's St. Christopher Medal, which Jimmy had promised to return to his family but never found the strength to do. A piece of shrapnel that had nearly killed him in Belgium. And at the bottom of the box, wrapped carefully in cloth, 5 corroded grenades pins. He'd kept them all these years. 5 pins from 5 grenades that had somehow, impossibly, changed the course of a battle, of a war, of history. Jimmy held them in his palm, feeling their weight. So light, so insignificant. And yet they represented everything: terror and courage, death and survival, failure and triumph, all mixed together in ways that could never be untangled. We did it. Boys, he whispered to the ghosts that had followed him home from France. We held the line. It cost us everything, but we held the line. Outside, the Nebraska wind whispered through winter fields. Inside, an old soldier wept for the boy he'd been, For the friends he'd lost, for the enemy soldiers whose deaths he'd caused, the world called him a hero. History books recorded his deed. Movies would someday dramatize that frozen December morning when one man stopped 5 tanks with nothing but grenades in desperation. But Jimmy Hartwell knew the truth. He wasn't a hero. He was a survivor, carrying the weight of that day for the rest of his life, wondering if he'd done enough, knowing he'd done all he could, and never, ever being able to forget the price. Epilogue: The truth behind the LEGND. Story of the soldier who stopped 5 tanks with 1 grenade became one of World War I's most celebrated tales of individual heroism. But like many war stories, the truth evolved with each retelling. Jimmy Hartwell did indeed face 5 German Panther tanks on that frozen December morning. He did destroy or disable them using hand grenades. But the official report, declassified decades later, reveals a more complex picture. The first tank was destroyed by grenades, dropped into its engine vents, a nearly impossible feat that required split-second timing and extraordinary courage. The resulting explosion and fire spread to the additional fuel drums carried by the tank, creating an inferno that engulfed 2 other vehicles that had been following too closely. The 4th tank was damaged by flying shrapnel from the explosions. Its crew, believing they were under attack from a new American weapon, abandoned the vehicle and retreated. The 5th tank, seeing the destruction, chose discretion over valor and withdrew without engaging. So did Jimmy stop 5 tanks with 1 grenade? No, he used 5 grenades against 1 tank. And circumstances, the positioning of the vehicles, the extra fuel drums, the panic of the German crews did the rest. But does that make his actions any less heroic? Not at all. Jimmy Hartwell saw an impossible situation and took the only action available to him, knowing it would likely cost him his life. He charged alone toward enemy armor when every instinct screamed at him to run. He completed his mission despite overwhelming odds. The Germans lost 3 tanks destroyed, 1 damaged, and 1 withdrawn. More importantly, they lost their momentum at a critical point in the Battle of the Bulge. The attack on Bastogne was delayed by hours that allowed reinforcements to arrive, and supplies to be airdropped. Military historians credit Hartwell's stand as one of dozens of small, desperate actions by individual soldiers and small units that collectively turned the tide of the battle. One man didn't win the Battle of the Bulge, but one man, on one morning, gave victory a chance. And in the end, isn't that what heroism really is? Not superhuman perfection, but ordinary humans rising to meet extraordinary challenges, doing what needs to be done regardless of the cost. James Jimmy Hartwell died in 2017 at the age of 96. His Medal of Honor citation is displayed at the U.S. Army Heritage and Education Center. His story is taught at military academies as an example of initiative, courage, and tactical creativity under fire, but perhaps his greatest legacy is simpler. He never stopped reminding people that war is hell, that heroes are human, and that peace is worth any price. Courage is not the absence of fear, but action in spite of it. On a frozen road in Belgium, one soldier proved that when everything is on the line, ordinary people can do the extraordinary not because they want to, but because they must.